The name's Bond.
James Bond. He's with me.
Have you ever found yourself looking into the mirror and wishing you were just a little bit cooler? Maybe a little bit more suave with the ladies? Maybe you even wish your life was more exciting? Then I got news for you. If the answer to any of those questions is yes, then you're a loser.
Who are you talking to right now?
If the answer is yes, then boy do I have the game for you. 007 First Light is the perfect James Bond simulator. It has everything a fan of Bond would want from a video game. Gadgets, guns, girls, we've got it all here. First Light is from the same studio that brought us the Hitman series, and I have to say, whoever thought to give the Hitman guys the James Bond license needs to be applauded. The slower, more methodical, stealth-focused gameplay where you have to come up with clever uses of your environment to get to your target is already so James Bond coded that the leap to actually adapting that IP probably wasn't very difficult for the developers at IO Interactive. The similarities are so obvious that IOI franchise director Jonathan LaCale, I think that's how you say it, said, and I quote, "Bond has been an inspiration for Hitman since the early days. And once you've played as Agent 47 stalking a target through a ballroom dressed in a tuxedo, you start to see where that inspiration came from." 007 First Light is a mixture of so many different ideas from a multitude of third-person action games that it really does carve a very unique niche for itself. The Hitman similarities are obvious, but another franchise you hear it often compared to is the Uncharted series. Uncharted is known for its fast-paced gunplay and over-the-top set pieces, all tied together nicely by a well-written story and well-shot cinematic cutscenes. In that sense, 007 First Light does have many similarities, and I think the comparison started when during the initial gameplay reveal, they showed off an airplane set piece that had Bond flying through the air without a parachute. IO Interactive must have known they'd get comparisons to Uncharted after designing a set piece like that. But honestly, the comparisons to Uncharted start and end with the set pieces. 007 First Light lends itself to more emergent gameplay design than anything Uncharted has ever come close to. And that's fine. These are two very unique types of games. But before we get too deep into what I mean by that, let's set the stage a little bit. 007 First Light has you playing as a young Bond who starts off in the Navy. He quickly gets wrapped up into a situation way above his pay grade. He barely survives, and this gets him noticed by the higher-ups at MI6, who then recruit him into the 00 program. I thought the idea of adapting an origin story for Bond was a unique idea. The closest we got to something like this outside of the books was seeing Daniel Craig earn his 00 status at the beginning of Casino Royale. But that movie wasn't really an origin story. Once he gets it, we go right into the usual Bond activities. We never see his training or see him get mentored in any way. This is a unique idea, but it also could have gone very bad as well. If Bond was written as incapable or uncool, we could have ended up with a Surf Dracula scenario here. If you're not aware of that analogy, Surf Dracula is a way to describe the trend in recent shows that spend an entire season building up to the thing that you actually wanted to see from the very start. If I'm watching a show called Surf Dracula, then why are we spending the whole season building up to that when every episode should just be Dracula on his surfboard? If we spent the entire game watching Bond become the cool, calm, collected man from the movies, instead of playing that from the start, I would have been disappointed.
I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
I'm not sure why modern entertainment is so against just giving fans what they want, but thankfully they didn't do that here. This version of Bond is very in line with what everyone loves about the character. He's extremely capable, he always has a witty comeback, and in a very Roger Moore way, almost every woman he talks to falls for him immediately.
Yoga candy dead ahead. No need to ask me twice to do a downward dog.
Leave the men candy alone, Babs.
This is not that kind of place. It's whatever I want it to be, hun. I'm paying enough for it.
Ladies?
Many people were afraid they'd shy away from the womanizing aspect of the character, and in my opinion, there's no point in adapting Bond if you're not going to make him the peak male fantasy. That's the entire appeal of the character. If you turn him into normal action guy number 207, then he's no longer special. The wit, the charm, and the fantasy is what makes the character so captivating. For some reason, characters that are written to be very good with women often have to deal with some sort of pushback. Characters like James Bond, Tony Stark, Don Draper, and myself all have to deal with being misunderstood just because we're extremely charming. Game journalists were already starting in on this game before it even came out. One viral article tried to argue that Bond doesn't work in a gaming medium because he can't personally relate to the character since he's a clumsy loser in real life. I don't know what kind of self-report that is, but the whole point of escapism entertainment is that you don't need to be Bond to enjoy playing as Bond.
James, I need you.
So does England.
That's why I call this game the perfect Bond simulator, because the gameplay went out of its way to include many of the aspects of the character we often see left out. Previous Bond games were seen as Call of Duty clones. They were more or less just straightforward shooters. There are some exceptions. Games like Everything or Nothing or Nightfire tried to change it up occasionally, but none of them worked the charm into the gameplay the way First Light has. One of the ways they managed to do this is with the use of the bluff mechanic. This game has a heavy emphasis on stealth, and one of the ways to avoid detection is by bluffing the enemy. If you're caught and you have enough meter, you can lie your way out of a situation.
Wakey, wakey. Badmer sent me to see who's guarding the table and who's leaning on it.
Whatever. Be quick and leave.
In and out before you know it.
This doesn't work on every guard. Some are more experienced than others and will see through your lie. These enemies are marked with a white dot above their heads, but it does show how IO Interactive wanted to work some of the other aspects of the character into the gameplay. Gameplay in First Light takes on a dual style approach. There are sections where you'll be doing the usual Hitman social stealth approach, and there will be sections where you're trespassing and have to sneak or fight your way through enemies. The social stealth sections have you exploring a semi-open area trying to accomplish a singular goal. Now there's plenty of options on how you can choose to go about this. These choices are usually revealed to you with indicators showing you a conversation that'll have a hint towards a way you can progress. Then it puts you on a path and tells you what you'll need to do in order to complete that route. I think my biggest problem with these sections is how hands-on they can be. Instead of just needing to be around the conversation when it happens, you need to press a button on a prompt in order for the conversation to register. Then, once you hear the hint, it'll often give you a step-by-step guide on how to complete it, as well as showing you exactly how many steps there are in total. This is a massive jump back when compared to how Hitman handles its mission routes. In Hitman, the hints are proximity-based, meaning you only need to be near the person, and once the route is revealed, it doesn't show you exactly how many steps you have left. I understand needing to give the player a little push in the right direction, but I felt these parts guided the player a little too strongly. Who knows though? With how these journalists play these games, they probably need the extra help. The good part is that there's plenty of ways to go about solving your goal, meaning two playthroughs can have different stories on how you navigated through a level. The bad part is that these different routes aren't that different from each other. A more immersive sim approach to these sections that really let you get creative with how you can solve problems would have been much better instead of these linear roller coaster style routes that lock you in. It usually boils down to going through a vent or darting an enemy to get to where you need to go. I would have liked each route to be like its own little side quest that has you going through areas you wouldn't have seen otherwise. This happens once or twice, but variety like that throughout the whole game would have made repeated playthroughs even more engaging. Speaking of darts, I did really like how they were able to work the use of gadgets into the gameplay as well. After the Craig era of Bond, it felt like the use of over-the-top gadgets was something they were trying to move away from. I'm glad that some of the more zany and out-there gadgets are included in this game. The Q-Watch gives you the ability to hack any electronics you see. This is usually good for distracting enemies, but there's still some unique hacks that can have a pretty volatile response.
You okay? Hey.
The dart phone is probably the most useful one during the social stealth sections. If you need a guard out of the way or need to pickpocket someone, shooting them once with a dart puts them completely out of commission for a while. The laser strap accomplishes the same goal as the dart phone, but it blinds enemies instead of disorienting them. The extra benefit is that this can be used on the environment as well. And the smoke pod is pretty self-explanatory. You can use it to cloud enemies in smoke, making all enemies caught in it vulnerable to an instant takedown. There are others, but I won't spoil all of them here. You're only allowed to equip up to 4 gadgets per mission. Now this means you'll have to put in some thought into which ones you prefer or what playstyle you'd rather engage with. On my first playthrough, I tried to mess around with each one a bit, but ended up sticking with my favorite 4 for most of the game. I'll try to force myself to use a variety of them on my next playthrough. Where the gameplay really excels is with the hand-to-hand combat. I was having so much fun with it that when I found out the principal combat designer for First Light was also the combat designer for Arkham Knight, I wasn't even surprised. Hand-to-hand combat involves blocking, dodging, and throwing enemies around. It's a very bar fight brawl type of combat system that made me almost want to get caught just so someone would try me. There's a faint yellow light before enemy attacks that indicates you need to block. Red indicators means a grab is coming and you need to dodge. Enemies that are blocking you will need to be grabbed and thrown in order to open them up. And throwing enemies into the environment can yield a myriad of results. Throw them off a ledge, instant win. Throw them into an electrical panel, instant win. Throw them into a fire extinguisher, instant win. Throw them into other enemies, not an instant win, but it is a good way to balance a room full of bad guys. There's also different enemy types that'll force you to change how you approach. There's basic grunts, swift martial artists, and heavy tanks. The martial artists require a series of blocks before you can open them up. The heavy tanks deal a lot of damage and love to throw you around. They'll block almost everything until you throw them back in response. During these sections, you're not allowed to shoot anyone until they start to use lethal force. This authorizes you the license to kill, and once the shooting starts, you'll be using all methods at your disposal to clear out a room. Gadgets, disarms, and guns are your best chance at getting through a room with the intent to kill. Everything is smooth here. Slowing time down and shooting a guy in the head, smooth. Shooting a guy's arm before running up and disarming him, smooth. Shooting someone in the leg to open them up to an instant takedown, smooth. Running out of ammo and throwing your weapon at an enemy, smooth. Everything Bond does in combat feels purposeful and, well, smooth. Even down to how Bond picks up weapons by kicking them up to him just exudes aura. Vaulting over an object, kicking a gun out of an enemy's hand, then shooting him with the said gun, just aura, bro. Aura. It's kind of crazy how little the marketing for this game showed off the combat. I've seen so many TikToks of people doing crazy shit, and then the comments had no idea any of that was possible in the game. And I guess this is where my biggest complaint with the game stems from. The combat is so fun that the social stealth sections just don't stack up. They more often than not end up feeling like padding in between all the cool stuff you'd rather be doing. And like I said before, if each route was its own big side quest, then maybe those parts would exude the same amount of life as the combat. The overall pacing of the campaign can be all over the place because of this. Some sections definitely feel like they were trying to pad out the runtime. The push for a more cinematic story hurts many parts of this game as well, especially the first quarter of the game. The tutorial for this game drags on for hours and has tons of walking and talking sections with NPCs. Now, I can't say anything that hasn't already been said about this. Forcing the player to hold forward on the controller while you word vomit dialogue is not a good way of conveying a story. The developers probably knew people might have this complaint. Now that's where the tax sim mode comes in. Tax sim is a way to jump straight into the combat in case you don't want to replay the campaign. This is side content that puts you in different combat scenarios from the main campaign, but now recontextualizes them with different enemies and different requirements in order to clear a level. This is a much appreciated side mode. If you ever get the itch for more combat, you can always jump into it quickly with tax sim instead of having to load into a certain section of the campaign. All this destruction is tied up nicely into a very well-crafted story. I enjoyed the narrative overall. I felt like they nailed the characterization of Bond, and Patrick Gibson was a stellar pick for the character. And I'm sure Amazon is upset that they now can't use him for the next movie. The supporting cast of Greenway as the mentor, Moneypenny as the girl in the chair, and M as the stone-cold leader all played their roles very well. Bond's bond with everyone felt earnest, and I ended up caring how the story would end and what their fates would be. The story had a lot of twists and turns, some of which I definitely didn't see coming. I think the weakest part was probably the villain. Their motivations were fine, but I can't see myself finding them all that memorable. Certainly not on the same level as Goldfinger, Oddjob, or Jaws, that's for sure. There's also a double agent type character named Isola that I can't really make an opinion on. I thought I was going to like her, but I felt like they were trying too hard to make her seem cool and mysterious. Bond and her have decent chemistry, but the one scene where she's a little bit vulnerable with him ends up being a big nothing burger. Nothing with her ever really goes anywhere by the end of the game, but I guess that was on purpose since they sequel bait pretty hard at the end. She definitely works for Spectre, by the way. This isn't spoilers because I don't know, but you all owe me $5 if she works for Spectre. On the graphics and performance side of things, I have a few complaints. This game does not have FSR 4 on release, only FSR 3, which is quite outdated by now, so for the first half of my playthrough, it was a blurry mess. I got so frustrated that I ended up using Optiscaler to enable DLSS 4, which ended up fixing my blurring. I tried turning off upscaling, but even at 1440p on an RX 9070, I couldn't get a consistent 60 FPS in some areas. This is actually unacceptable, especially since the game does look pretty, but not nearly enough to warrant that performance cost. It runs well in small areas, but the second it opens up and there's more than 10 NPCs on the screen, it tanks. It's not on Unreal Engine, so I didn't get any stutters, thank God, but it's just an overall very performance-heavy game. Now, there's a lot that was done right here. The vibe, the combat, and the overall narrative is strong, just dragged down by a few hiccups along the way. The foundation here is so good, this feels like the type of game that a sequel that does everything just that little bit better is going to be something really special. Based on the fact that this game sold 1.5 million copies in one day, I say we'll be seeing more of Patrick Gibson's Bond sooner rather than later. I'd recommend this game to Bond fans, but above that, I'd recommend it to anyone who enjoys third-person action games in general. The gameplay systems here are familiar, but also unique enough that it carves its own niche in an oversaturated market. Anyways, that's all from me. Let me know if you guys are playing and enjoying First Light and what your favorite part about it was. Also let me know what y'all's favorite Bond actor is. If you choose anyone but Lazenby, you're wrong. See ya.